Welcome to Coaching with Confidence and Care podcast, inspired by common topics that arise in coach training, mentoring, and supervision. I am Dr. Luba Desamidze, the founder of Upthink Coaching. I'm an active coach trainer, mentor, and supervisor. If you are listening, you're probably looking to deepen your skills as a coach. I hope this podcast will be a helpful resource for you and contributes to your journey. Hi, coaches. In this episode, I want to talk about something subtle that can be a bit confusing, yet is often a sign of more advanced coaching. And that is working with energy shifts in sessions. You might have heard about that, and I'm sure those of you who use the ICF model of core competencies have seen energy shifts under core competency 6. There's a behavioral marker 6.4, which says notices, acknowledges, and explores the client's emotions, energy shifts, nonverbal cues, or other behaviors. The revised version of the core competencies also provides a definition, which says that energy shifts are changes in a client's emotional or physical energy levels, which can impact their engagement and progress in coaching. In this episode, I will address some of the common questions that arise when it comes to working with energy shifts. And I hear coaches often have questions about those. The term itself may trigger mixed feelings for some coaches. To some, it may sound ambiguous or unreliable, maybe even a bit woo-woo, which can understandably lead to some skepticism. In addition, not everyone is naturally attuned to the signals that emerge in conversation dynamics. And for some coaches, holding dual attention, that is, tracking both content and process, can be a real challenge. Then, of course, there are some doubts about perception. Have I noticed a shift? Am I overthinking? Is that me or my client? There can also be uncertainty around timing and the value of bringing in this kind of process observations during a coaching session. I've just said process observations because energy shifts do not refer to the verbal content of the session. They relate to process information, how the session is unfolding, and what is happening within it. Process information means observable in-the-moment features of the interaction. For example, these can be shifts in engagement level. Your client was bubbly before, but then suddenly something changed in the coaching session and they became more reserved or introverted. For instance, a client might be speaking quickly, smiling, and elaborating freely about their ideas. And then after mentioning a specific situation or a specific stakeholder, they lean back, their tone becomes flatter, and their answers become shorter. And you might say, "You were very animated just now, and then you became quieter. What is happening here?" Another sign could be changes in emotional activation. For example, your client was pretty even and unemotional, and then suddenly something happened and they became a lot more enthusiastic. And you heard some excitement in their voice, or it can be the other way around. Your client may start off quite excited, sharing enthusiastically, and then you notice a drop in energy, perhaps with some ambivalence. You don't have to name those emotions. We are not expected to name emotions for the client, but there's a change in emotional tone that you can notice and share your observations. For example, a client might be describing a project in a steady, neutral way, and then when they mention a particular opportunity, their voice lifts, they speak faster, and they lean forward. Or, conversely, they might begin with energy and optimism, and then after referring to a specific challenge, their voice softens, their pace slows, and there's a noticeable dip. You could reflect this by saying, as you were talking about the last part, your energy seemed to shift. What did you notice? Then the next sign can be pacing, pauses, or speech patterns and changes in those. For example, a client who's been speaking fluently may suddenly pause mid-sentence, take a long silence, or start searching for words. Or someone who usually speaks slowly and thoughtfully might begin to rush, interrupt themselves, or jump between ideas. You might notice repeated fillers, unfinished sentences, or a sudden tightening of language. And in such cases, you could say something like, "You paused there for a moment," or "Your pace changed just now. What's going on for you?" Now, why is process information important? Why do we even pay attention to these energy shifts when they're not about the content at all? First, and most obvious, there's a lot of information that is verbally unexpressed. Just because it wasn't said, it doesn't mean that it does not exist. An energy shift signifies that a deeper process is happening for the client. Process research consistently shows that outcomes are strongly linked to how the interaction unfolds, not only to what is being discussed. In other words, it's not just what the client talks about that drives change, but how they engage with it in the moment. 2 sessions can cover the exact same topic, say a leadership challenge, but lead to very different outcomes depending on the quality of attention, emotional engagement, and interaction between coach and client. For example, a client might speak about a difficult conversation they need to have. In one version of the session, they describe it in a detached, analytical way, staying at a surface level. The conversation remains clear, but it doesn't really move anything visibly. In another version, the coach notices hesitation, pause, or a shift in tone and invites the client to stay with it. The client slows down, reflects more deeply, and begins to assess what actually matters to them. The topic hasn't changed, but the process has, and that's where the impact comes from. So, when you are paying attention to energy shifts, pacing, or engagement, you are not stepping away from real coaching work. You are working directly with the mechanisms that make coaching effective. Process commentary and observations give real-time feedback about the interaction, and you can pretty much say whether the coaching session is going well for the client, whether it is productive for the client, or whether it is stalled. They may not say, "We are going in the wrong direction now," but you can sense something changed in the way they're talking. Maybe they start to feel that the session is indeed going in the wrong direction, but they think the coach knows better, so they don't say anything. If you hear a drop in energy, maybe the conversation is not going in a meaningful area for the client. And if you notice that, you can recalibrate in the moment. Many process elements are felt, but not explicitly recognized by the client. And when the coach names observable processes, implicit experience becomes explicit data. As I always say, anything that happens in a coaching session is okay because everything is information and part of the process. Let me share another example here. I had this client and she was talking very confidently. Her message was very well structured. She sounded almost like presenting. Super eloquent in sessions, like everything was already figured out. And then she said something like, "I just need to step up more as a leader, be more decisive." And then she suddenly stopped and she was quiet for some time. And I could feel how the energy just softened in a way. I sensed that was a vulnerable moment for the client. And I said, "Something changes now." And she said, "Yeah." And then I said, "You were really clear." And then you stopped. And then she went, "Yeah." Then I said, "So what's happening here?" And she finally said, "I don't think I believe what I was just saying." And by staying with that shift, we were able to surface a very vulnerable piece that completely reshaped everything that she was saying later on. Another value of working with process awareness is that comments about the conversation dynamics support your client's meta-awareness, that is, awareness of their own experience in the session. Increased meta-awareness, in its turn, is associated with improved emotional processing, which is part of every coaching session. If you are not used to working with clients' emotions or emotional processing, you might experience a sudden shift in the session dynamics as something unsettling, as if something's going off track, and you may not be sure how to respond. Last but not least, process observations also contribute to the quality of the coaching relationship or the working alliance, which is one of the most robust predictors of coaching outcomes across studies. If a client's energy shifts and the coach notices it, this can strengthen the relationship and support a more effective session outcome. However, if a client experiences a shift and the coach overlooks it, doesn't acknowledge it, or fails to comment on it, the client may feel unseen. The working alliance may weaken, a rupture may occur, or the client may disengage because the coach is not responding to what is happening for them in the moment. And to illustrate this point, I'd like to share another example with you. I had a client who was sharing quite openly, and we had a really good connection. The session was flowing, and then at some point I asked something, maybe a bit stretching, but it was nothing aggressive, of course, and I also asked it in a quite a delicate, balanced way. I don't remember the question exactly. Then she answered, but her tone changed. I felt she started to sound a bit more distant and formal. Her answers became shorter, and it was subtle, but I sensed that the connection tightened, and I shared with her that something just shifted between us right now. And she said, yeah. And then I said, well, what happened for you? And she said, yeah, I think I felt a bit exposed by that question. And that was not my intention to make her feel bad, of course. So I said, I did not mean to make you feel uncomfortable, and I apologize if that sounded too direct. What felt exposing? And that allowed us to deepen the conversation. Now, could that rupture have deepened if I hadn't addressed that? I think so. Now, there can be some micro ruptures in conversations. We are all alive, we are not wax figures, and I believe that when you engage in open, vulnerable, and courageous conversations, these uncomfortable moments are bound to happen from time to time. They don't make you a bad coach, but they do require the skill of repairing those ruptures. There are sometimes relational micro ruptures, and their repair can actually strengthen the relationship if it's done well, because you role model your own vulnerability, discomfort, openness, and connection. So stay emotionally attuned to the client and be ready to repair the rupture so that you don't appear insensitive to the client's process. I'd like to offer you a few pointers. Of course, working with energy shifts goes beyond these suggestions, and it's all about practice, but as a starting point and within the limits of a single podcast episode, this could give you something practical to work with. First, treat a shift as data. When an energy shift happens, for example, sudden silence, drop in engagement, or a spike in emotion, orient to it as information about the client's current state and the information they're sharing. Instead of moving away, ignoring it, or smoothing it over, pause and register what has changed in observable terms. This creates a moment of shared attention that can actually anchor your process in the present. Implicit material may start to show up, so staying with it increases the chance of accessing deeper layers. Slow the process down to match the shift. Meaningful shifts may be accompanied by natural slowing. If the coach maintains a fast pace, such moments are often bypassed, but matching the pace of your client will support their processing capacity. In practice, that would mean tolerating silence, reducing the number of questions, and letting the client stay with emergent experience, exploring how the emergent experience relates to the topic of the conversation or the client's awareness around the topic. Second, name the shift using very clean and descriptive language. Your observations can be specific and not include interpretation. So sometimes we say they should not be judgmental. And when I say judgmental, I don't mean criticizing, I mean evaluating. For example, you could say something like, you became quieter just now, or your pace slowed, or there was a pause when you said that. This brings the client's attention to the process without imposing meaning. And it's not really about explaining the shift. It's about making it visible first. This often increases the client's awareness of their own internal changes, and this kind of prepares them for deeper processing. After naming a shift, surface the shift, redirect attention back to the client and ask them, what are you noticing right now? Or what is happening for you as you pause? This shift evokes the locus of authority toward the client's experience rather than your own interpretation. And it also develops your client capacity for self-observation. This is one of the skills that is truly empowering, and it will be used by your clients beyond the sessions. Over time, this will result in your clients recognizing and working with those shifts independently. Third, when a shift happens, you don't have to interpret it. This is one of the key rules in coaching. You notice, you acknowledge, but you do not interpret. You do not make any conclusions about what has just happened. You simply don't know. Do not assign any labels to shifts, such as good or bad, happy or sad, productive and unproductive. Let clients comment on them. This means one of the key skills you need to develop in order to coach at a more advanced level is staying with ambiguity without defaulting to explanation. This stance allows the client's experience to unfold at its own pace rather than being shaped prematurely. If a shift was noticed by you, but it was not explored, so maybe you decided to ask a different question and explore something else. Don't rush to address it when it's gone. Sometimes there's an opportunity, if a certain moment repeats, it may be relevant to revisit the dynamics. And you could say something like, earlier in the session, you paused when you mentioned X. And this gives your client another opportunity to engage with that thought or emotion or moment. It also reduces pressure on you to catch everything perfectly in real time. This is really impossible. And once a coach strives to do that, it creates an immense amount of pressure on the coach in the session. You can also use, if you are worried that a process comment may distract your client from the content of the session, and for whatever reasons you don't want to distract them. Maybe you are not sure your clients can get back on track, or you have a client who's a verbal processor, and once there's a comment that doesn't strictly support the content, they will go on and on. So, with such clients, you can use shifts to bridge content and process. For example, after noticing and sharing a shift with a client, you can link it back to the topic in a grounded way. And you could say something like, as you slow down here, how does that connect to what you're describing? Such links, such bridges can help you integrate experiential awareness with a client's narrative instead of splitting them. And it also supports the client's clarity and evokes awareness, as you can see how their way of engaging relates to the issue that they brought. Well, not every shift will lead directly to immediate insight. And here I couldn't stress enough the importance of developing tolerance for not knowing. Last but not least, and this is not new to you, remember that there's no algorithm for coaching. You adjust the depth and duration of the interaction based on observable engagement and responsiveness. And this will allow you to avoid overworking or underworking process moments. That's all I wanted to share with you today. Working with energy shifts is less about adding something new to your coaching and more about refining how you pay attention. It's a shift from focusing only on content to also tracking what is happening in the interaction itself and deciding whether that is relevant to bring into the conversation. Not every shift needs to be explored, and not every moment needs intervention. The skill is in discerning what matters and staying with it long enough for the client to engage with it meaningfully. And of course, it's all about dancing in the moment. In the next episode, we are tackling a different kind of challenge many coaches face: uncooperative clients. The ones who seem disengaged, give minimal answers, resist questions, don't meet you in the process, or maybe even hijack the session. We'll look at what may actually be happening in those moments and how to work with it without forcing engagement or taking it personally. New episodes come out every 2 weeks, alternating with our YouTube series, Conversations with Coaches, where we explore real, behind-the-scenes thinking with practitioners from across different coaching contexts. If you want to deepen your coaching beyond techniques and tools into reflective practice and psychologically informed work, grounded in emotional and intercultural intelligence, our ICF-accredited programs open again in 2026. You'll find all the details at our website, www.upthinkcoaching.com. This year, we are also keeping a waitlist for our Leader as Coach workshop. It's a full day focused on applied practice and real scenarios. Reach out to me if you're interested, and I'll let you know when the next date is. I'm always open to thoughtful conversations on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out. I work one-on-one through mentor coaching and supervision, if you're looking for a space to reflect more rigorously on your practice. Alright, see you next time!